Well, my full name is Herbert Manton, and because it's Robert Herbert, most people call me Bert. I've lived here at Woodford Halse for 26 years, but I've always been a Northamptonshire person, being born and bred at Kettering, or Kettering as they would call it out there. And for most of my life I've been a school teacher, and in the latter part of my career I taught country crafts under the umbrella of design and technology at a comprehensive school. And when I retired, I thought I'd like to carry on doing the rural craft work with classes of 1 or 2 with no paperwork, and so I've been doing that ever since. Every year at Danger I used to take a group of pupils to the Royal Show. 33 times I went. And on one occasion came back with more pupils than I took, but that's another story. Anyway, I always made a beeline for the country craft section, and there was this elderly chap making a wattle hurdle. And I got talking to him and said, I'd like to learn how to do that. His name was Charlie West. And he looked up at me and he said, well, you're not going to learn anything standing there then, are you? I said, well, no, is there an opportunity for me to learn the hurdle making? He said, you come down to Dorset, boy. He said, I'll teach you to make a hurdle. And I took him up on that. And I turned up on his doorstep down in Dorset, Witchampton. And I went down there many times. Even took my caravan and parked it in the woods, and we'd make hurdles in the woods. Fantastic character. He was the 5th generation of hurdle makers. Unfortunately, he died 20 years ago now. But he taught me a lot. And we recorded on paper hurdle making and all the techniques, and all that was deposited in Dorchester Museum. And hopefully we'll be able to put a video in with the information as well. So in a way I'd like to dedicate this to Charlie West, because he always wanted to make a video of a hurdle being made. He felt it was important that the craft should not be lost, because once you haven't got anybody to show you, it's finished. I'm going to show you how to make a traditional Dorset style sheep hurdle. Originally these would have been used for penning sheep or folding sheep across root crops down in Dorset, Hampshire, southern counties. So thousands if not millions of these were made in the past, but there's no call for them at all today. What is used today are the garden hurdles, but the traditional sheep hurdle had a hole in the middle where you could put your hand through in order to carry it. That was called the twilly hole, and you'll see that being made later. And the end sails, because the uprights are called the sails, the two end sails were left longer so that you could overlap the hurdles, and with a shackle, which is just a twisted loop of hazel, you could link them together. They were never driven in the ground, they were just propped. You put a prop or a shore through the shackle and they would be lent at an angle across the field. In the woods, you wouldn't normally be in an environment like this. The hurdle making was always done in the woods because it saves carting a lot of stuff about. And the hurdle maker's pitch is what we've got just here, which consisted of a very simple arrangement. It consists of a gauge stick, which has got notches on in order to measure the sticks to length. And also this can be used as a support for cut rods, so that we can just support them for easy access when we're doing the hurdle making, and also a chopping block. The end sails, the sails being the uprights of the hurdle, the end sails, the two end sails are round, and you generally look for a straight, strong stick such as this to make your end sail. And the first process will be to put a point on the end. This is where the chopping block and the bill hook comes in. And the important thing is that you get a nice tidy point, and all the points must be the same sort of length, otherwise they knock into the frame at different heights. So I'll put a point on this, turn it through 90 degrees, 90 degrees, so we've got a nice tidy point. Once you've made the point, you can then cut this to length. So you use the gauge, you've got a shoulder at this end, just here, so you put the point into the shoulder. I've got a mark on this gauge stick here for the length of this end sail, and I'll just sort of mark it with my bill hook. Then I'll bring it across onto the chopping block and just cut it to length and just take that corner off. So just checking again, that's the right length. So that's an end sail. I'll come across to the frame. So this is called the frame or the mould, and in which the hurdle is made. You could make a hurdle by just knocking your sails into the ground, but if you were working in the same spot for a long period of time, you'd finish up in a quagmire. So, and also you need to be consistent with the length, especially if you're selling them for garden purposes. Now this frame or mould is just an old railway sleeper. They wouldn't have had one of these in the woods because it's a bit cumbersome to get into the wood. You'd just cut a tree down, and preferably a tree that's got a bit of a curve to it, because the hurdle is made on a curve. Now it might be a bit confusing with all these bits of sticking out here. This isn't the traditional hurdle makers going on. There are so many holes in here for different size hurdles that I have to be careful I don't put my sails in the wrong holes. So I've just blocked off that set of holes with those sticks, and I can start now putting the sails into the correct holes, and when they're in line I can take those others out of the way. So we can now build up the set of sails. It's worth mentioning that there are 10 sails, 10 uprights in a traditional sheep hurdle. The reason for that is if you have 10, then you can get a middle point where you can build the twilly to put your hand through. Most garden hurdles are now 9-sailed, so this frame I can do a 9-sailed garden hurdle in it or a 10-sailed sheep hurdle. So I'll put the set of sails in, bearing in mind that we want the good straight round ones on the ends, and we just tap those into place. So this is the other end sail, nice straight stick, good stick this one. Tap it into place. The next one's going to be a round one as well, so the two end sails are round, and the intermediate ones are split. I'll put these in place and then demonstrate how they're split. And there's two ways I can put the sail in. I can put it in because you've got a natural curve on the sails, and I can either put it in that way or that way, but they all want to go in, so the curves are all going the same way, so it's helping you with the weaving. You don't want the sail sort of working against you by bending away. So that will go in that way. Now a hurdle isn't trimmed off when you finish. It's woven to that actual height. So it's worth at this stage just checking the heights of these, which I like to do, and that should be about 3 feet. So they look okay. What we don't want is a sail that's very low. Now I'm going to show you how the sails are made, because these are made from thicker material that's split down. When the hazel is cut in the woods, you finish up with in your bundle thick pieces, thin pieces, very thin pieces, and it all has to go into the hurdle. You can't be too sort of fussy and only choose pieces that are going to be ideal. So the thicker stuff like this could be of two purposes. In the days of the sheep hurdle, a piece like this could be used as a shore, which would help prop the hurdle up, or you could split it down to make the intermediate sails. I look at the stick, and I think, well, that's the direction I want it to split, so you've got that natural curve will go into the hurdle rather than splitting it down in the opposite direction. So I start the split off with my bill hook across the top, just work it into the stick. And then it's a matter of using your knees and the leverage in the hook. You're not now using the hook as a sharp tool, you're just using it as a lever. And I watch the split, and in order to get the wood splitting down the middle, I either have to pull one way or the other. The split always runs to the wood under tension. So if I pull to the left, the split will run to the left. If I want the split to run to the right, I turn the rod over, again pull to the left, and the split will run the other way. So watching and also listening, it generally sounds right when it's splitting down the middle. And then we just part that. So we've got two halves of what we call the splitting image, because the two are identical. They fit back together. These now have to be pointed and cut to length. So I'll go back to the gauge stick and the chopping block. Now you can see there's a curve in the bottom of that stick. I don't need to trim it from that side because it's already forming a point. So I only need really to trim it from this side. So if I take that down there, it started to form a point. So you always have to work with the wood and the way the wood is shaped. That's now cut to length. And there's a sail. This next sail, which was the other half of that one, is a bit thick at the bottom, and really it needs a piece taking out. You might be tempted to try and shave a piece off, but that's not very satisfactory. The best way is to actually split a piece out, so you go into the side of the stick See, I'm taking away a lot of the meat and thickness of that. That is now a nice flexible rod. Again, pointing it just from one side because it's got that curve. And then cut into lengths. I'm standing at what we call the front of the hurdle, and the next stage is called picking up the bottom and involves using thin round rods. And for this we'd need 7 round rods and about seven or a few more slightly thinner ones. So this is for picking up the bottom. So this is the bottom that we're talking about of the round rods. And you can see down here there's a rod that comes up, and that's called the spur rod. And that's very important because the spur rod gives a lot of tension and strength to the bottom of the hurdle. If you didn't have these spur rods, if it was just woven in and out, the bottom of the hurdle could fall out, because these would be lifted up and carried and dropped down and carried and dropped down dozens and dozens of times. And if you didn't have the spur rods, you'd soon find the hurdle, you'd leave bits of wood behind you as you moved them around. So when I'm picking up the bottom on this hurdle, I have to allow for these spur rods, 2 spur rods sticking out that end and 2 spur rods sticking out the other end, as you'll see. I take my first spur rod, bearing in mind that this one needs to be a good rod. When I say good rod, it doesn't want to have any breaks or knots or branches because it's going to have to be twisted. So I lay the first spur rod in between the second and the third sail. So I take the next spur rod and just bow that in behind the third sail. So those 2 sticking out there are going to form the spur rods in the bottom of the hurdle. The rest of the rods I can now place in. This is called the butt end, the thick end of the rod. So the butt goes to the third, butt to the third, and just press down. Butt to the fourth. Push to the bottom. Next one, butt to the 5th. I'm just going to bow that a little bit, take a bit of the strength out of it so that it doesn't pull the hurdle out of shape, because it's quite a strong rod. And you can see I'm using my feet in order to press everything down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need 1 more. So there's 7 rods gone into the bottom of the hurdle. The last 2 I put in, I pick up this one and just take it through the hurdle, lay it down, and those 2 you can see sticking out there are going to be the spur rods that end. I'll leave the spur rods alone for the moment, but I mustn't forget about them. Nothing worse than getting up to the top of the hurdle and find you've still got your spur rod sticking out. So I'll work my way back, take this next bottom rod and weave this one in, using your feet right. We've got the spur rods, the two spur rods sticking out at the bottom there. I've just woven the next one in on top, and then this has got to be twisted around the end sail. This rod's got to be twisted. If you just try bending it round, it'll crack off. But hazel has this magic property of being lots of fibres, and if you can separate the fibres, you'll turn it into a rope. So a beginner would probably hold onto the rod and try and wring its neck and twist it, which is virtually impossible. But if you use the whole thing as a crank and wind it, then you can wind that twist in there, and so you've gone round without your wood breaking out. This is where my ballet dancing lessons came in handy. This end's starting to build up, as you can see, whereas there's still nothing at this end. So what we've got to do now is level off the bottom, so we start working back to the right using round rods. Some here will do quite nicely. So I'll place a rod in, weave it away, then the next one. Obviously we don't want to put the next one directly on top of the one we've just put in, otherwise it's going to get bigger and fatter that end. So we now step back a sail, put the next rod in, this is a gauge stick which we use to keep checking the width. This is a 6-foot hurdle, so I just put it in there, and there's a notch cut in the end, and at the moment it's level with the end, so we keep checking that until we're right to the top to make sure it's parallel, vertical and parallel. There's a tendency with the tension of the twists to pull the end sails in, and nothing more annoying to get to near the top of the hurdle and find your end sails are coming in. It's important they're vertical, especially if it's a garden hurdle, because you want the next one butting up against it, not a great gap between them. So the gauge stick is important there. Right, we've just about finished picking up the bottom. The final thing and the most important thing about picking up the bottom is to weave in the spur rods. So these are brought through the hurdle, and then twisted around. And by bringing them through and twisting them, they really pinch onto the end sail. So I'll just come this side, twist them into a rope. You can see that one's gone particularly well. Keep the end sail out so it doesn't pull back in. So that's that one in. The other one we bring back up through. That one's not quite so good, but most of the wood is there. And through. You've got about half a dozen round rods picking up the bottom. Then the spur rods come up and across those rods, and then holding those rods in, because the spur rods are pinching at this point. No way is the bottom going to slip out. So I've brought the spur rods up at this end. Now I do the spur rods at the other end. So pick up the spur rod. If you were to just come round the end sail, then it wouldn't be gripping it and the bottom could still fall out. So coming through the hurdle, and then using the rod as a crank to turn it into a rope. That's one of the joys of hazel, how the fibres separate. Not many other woods respond quite as well as hazel to this. That's why hazel is particularly popular for hurdle making. And weave that one away. Then going back, not forgetting the last spur rod, up through the hurdle, crank it again, and round. Not really worth worrying about them odd bits on the end. So that's the bottom picked up. We can now start on the body rods, and so I'll show you how we do a bit of splitting again. I've already shown you for the sails, but we'll go into perhaps a bit more detail on the splitting of the rods for the body of the hurdle. This stick is about 7 years old and ideal size for hurdle making. And we've got to split this down the middle, and you can see there's a branch sticking out there, or was a branch sticking out there, and the split will run nicely down between the branches. Most people know that it's difficult to split wood through a knot, but if you go down through the middle you should be able to cleave it in half. So, and these branches, they all, up to about 7, 8, 9 years, the branches all come off in the same plane. After about 9 years the branches start to be thrown all the way around the stick and they're not quite as easy to split. So the process for splitting, I've got quite a nice little light splitting hook. It's the curve on the hook that is the important part. It's no good trying to split hazel with a sort of straight bill hook. A lot of modern bill hooks have got a straightish sort of edge, very little curve, but it's that throat that we're looking for. So we grip the stick in between the knees, bearing in mind where that branch was and the direction the split is going to go. I enter the stick, making sure I don't chop through my fingers, and then using the hook to open up the split, and we can turn the rod over as we get going. I mentioned before that the split always runs to the wood under pressure. So if I pull to the right, or to pull to the left, sorry, it'll split out to the left. Turn it over and pull to the left, it'll split that way again. So you're continually watching the split and either pushing it one way or the other, or sometimes you have to turn it right over. Didn't go quite through the split through the knot as we'd hoped, but anyway, it's gone through. I'm now pulling to the left to bring the split back to the middle. So we're just using the hook as a lever, not as a sharp tool. It's only the sharp cut is just to enter the stick from the start, but now we're just using it as a lever. So there's the stick in half, as we said, the splitting image. So I now start weaving these body rods in. Doesn't really matter too much which end I start. Generally the white to the front. I'm now standing at the back of the hurdle. And then going to this end, this has now got to be bent around the end sail, same principle as before. So you place your hand in front, give it a half twist, and you can see the fibres have separated, and now that'll come round with the minimum amount of breaking out. The next rod goes in opposite. So we put about 6 in butt ends to that sail, 6 in this way, and then change and go 6 the other way. So this is the wattling bit, the weaving bit. A process that hasn't changed in thousands of years. And the important thing to do when you're building the hurdle is to constantly be working the hurdle. If you've got a sail sticking out, you bend it back, you pull it back. Even if you have to break the fibres, just take the strength out of it like that, it comes back in line. It's no good waiting until you're near the top and finding that your sails are rods like dog's teeth. You have to keep them straight right from the start. So you've got to keep working the hurdle. Bend round the end. Some hurdle makers like to have the frame tip back, like that, at that sort of angle, because sometimes it's easier to work the rods in. Sometimes you'll see that. All good exercise. Twist around and back. Check for width again. There's a bit of a pull out there just to be level with our mark. Bit of a pull the other end. That will go out more easily because it's not bound in so much yet. We've come to the twilly, position for the twilly. What we've got to achieve is something comfortable to put your hand through to hold on to. So we've got to make the space and then put some round rods in so it's comfortable to your hand. So I'm going to put in some split rods to there, but then he's got to double back one more on there. So we'll do the same the other side. So it's forming the hole there for the hand. Give that a little trim up so you can see where the holes form in there. So that's the actual hole formed. We now put 2 round rods in, called twilly rods, across the top, and those will help straighten everything up and strengthen everything, because we've now got a bit of a break in the hurdle here, so it weakens it. and twist that one back round. And then the next one. This forms, there's the twilly, that forms a nice grip there, so when you're carrying it there's nothing sharp. You wouldn't want any of these sharp edges of the body rods cutting into your hand if you're carrying it any distance. But that's quite comfortable as it is there. And now it's also strengthened the hurdle up. Keep working the sails if they're getting a bit out of line. Right, so we just rope this one round. We've done the twilly. We now need to take the weave up to about 9 inches from the top. 9 inches, you'll notice the absence of tape measures in the whole process. 9 inches there is from the length of that handle on the mallet. So we've got to weave up to there, keeping it horizontal, and then we start weaving in the top, which is a sort of a reversal of picking up the bottom, as you'll see. Another couple. I think we're about 9 inches from the top. Just checking. There we are. So we can now start topping off. And what that involves is I'm going to use split rods. And we'll start, at this point we've got to start sloping the work up. So the first rod's going to go in at the end and be woven away. The second rod, next rod will go in butt to the front there and woven away, and then butt to the third, woven away, butt to the fourth, and so after 4 or 5 rods the work will start to slope up, ready to finish the top off. Right, so that's brought the work up on the slope. Now to finish the top, we're going to need 5 good quality split ones, 5 split ones and 2 round ones. And we'll work from this end, and as we work away along, it should build up and it should finish level. The first rod, top finishing rod to go in, creates a spur rod. Just like we've had spur rods down at the bottom, this becomes a spur rod. So but this only happens on this end. You can't put a spur rod on both ends. We have a different arrangement on that end. So you push the spur rod in through the weave, then that's got to come round the end sail. Quite an easy one to twist because you've got so much leverage. That illustrates well how it turns into a rope. And then weave that away. Yeah, this top rod that's just gone in, I started it coming through the weave down there. Now it's come up around the end sail and then woven away. Now that is gripping really tightly and holding the top in, stops the top pulling out. Because if you're moving a hurdle about every day when folding sheep or whatever, you could easily pull the top off, but you're not going to pull the top off with that pinched spur rod. So that's the first top finishing rod. The next one goes in underneath the spur rod, and then woven away. So we've got 2 top rods in, this is the 3rd, and you see the top is finishing level as we're working the way along. So that's 3. Out there for that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last 2 rods to go in is a strong round one called the daddy rod or stump rod, and this is quite a nice strong rod, so that's going to be the daddy rod or stump rod. Again, going into the weave, progressing away along the top. If you can't get the rods apart, just stick your billock in. Just leave them up. So you can, everything's getting pretty tight on the top here. Well, that's the idea. So we weave this one away. But I'm not going to bring that through the hurdle yet, it's going to stay out there. That's helped strengthen the top up tremendously. Now I just need one more rod, a top finishing rod. Again, goes in following the progression. Now this one, we put a double twist in it in order to grip the end sail. So plenty of roping. Round once, round twice, and then carefully weave this end away, hopefully not. Just give it time to bend, don't rush these sticks, and through we go. So that's the last rod in, and the daddy rod ideally wants to come up and through. Again, just taking it gently. If you rush it, you'll crack it off. And that just sits on top of your double twist, protects the double twist, and that end is less likely to pull out. That's what's known as using your brains to save your back. Now this needs trimming out, but you got to, after all this effort, you don't want to start cutting into the weaving that you've already done. So I generally select a stick so to trim that spur rod off and all the rest, use a bit of stick just to protect the weave in the body, so you can trim that off. And if you're going to cut into anything, you'll cut into your stick and not into the work below. So we work our way across. Out of historical interest, a sheep hurdle, all the ends should be on one side. So the smooth side goes against the sheep, and the rough side they can't catch the wool on. So theoretically, all the ends should come through to the front. Now if this was a garden hurdle, it should finish 6 feet long exactly. and 6 feet is from the ends of these trimmings to the other end, 6 feet. So the actual sails on the garden hurdle would be 5 foot 10.5 apart, 3/4 of an inch allowed sticking out for the body rods, trimmed off, so that gives you exactly 6 feet. So that's the idea. Doesn't matter too much on a sheep hurdle. The hurdle, when it was sold, it was always sold a hurdle, a shackle and a shore. The shackle has got to be the twist of hazel that will bind 2 hurdles together. You could just drop your shackle over to hold the end together. Or if you were going across a field, like folding sheep on roots or whatever, you'd have to overlap the 2 hurdles and put the shackle on to go between, you know, all 4 of the sails, right, which would hold them together. And then in order to prop these up in the field, you'd use a shore, which would be a pole such as that, which would just go through your shackle and everything would lean back on the shore. In order to move these about in the field, you could carry them one at a time, or say 2, and one in each hand, or you could put your shore through the twilly hole of half a dozen hurdles and the shepherd could carry them on his shoulder and move them to the next place of the field where the sheep were being folded. So hurdle, shackle and shore. So if it was a dozen hurdles, it'd be a dozen hurdles, a dozen shackles, a dozen shores. A shackle is holding the end of a rod under your foot and then using this sort of cranking action I can hear the fibres breaking. I don't know whether you can back there. So I work my way right the way down into the thick end of the stick. So that's now turned it into a rope. So we bend that round, bring this end through. All basket makers are familiar with this sort of process because you do it in the basket making process. So there's your shackle over the 2, just to bind the 2 together. Simple, no tying needed, and the sheep aren't going to push those apart. And then you put your shore through and lean it back. So you'd leave them leaning back with the shore through so that it'll support them across the field. And then with your shackle, you're across here and the 2 are together. Yeah, what about this, eh? Whoa, what about this? You're all going in as well. You coming back in? Go on. Come on. Come on. I know you're a bit wary. Go on, you're missing out on your breakfast. So although they're not made commercially anymore because there's just no profit in it because of modern fencing techniques, they're still, on a small holding such as this, they're still an ideal thing to have about when you want to make a quick pen, or you can put some straw inside, make a lambing pen, use a couple of hurdles to make a top, and so they're very versatile, blocking gaps or going across around the garden. So there you are, the traditional Dorset sheep hurdle. Hello, hello, you want to get out, don't you? You want to make these taller.